On a luxurious terrace suspended above the city, two boys were laughing as they chased a napkin carried by the wind. No one saw when they slipped, except for an 11-year-old girl who wasn't even invited. While the adults froze in shock, she ran to save them. If this beautiful story of overcoming and love interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you are watching us from. The December sun shone brightly over Los Angeles, reflecting off the mirrored glass of the Summit Tower, a 64-story colossus that challenged the clouds. On the terrace of the top floor, the Golden View restaurant hosted a celebration that seemed to float above the metropolis like a dream of glass and Carrara marble. It was the type of place where everything gleamed under the golden light of late afternoon: baccarat crystal glasses, hand-embroidered French linen napkins, guests dressed in clothes that cost more than many families spent in an entire year. Jonathan Harrison Andrews observed his own 42nd birthday party with an automatic smile plastered on his face. A real estate entrepreneur and owner of one of the largest construction companies in the country, he had built an empire that stretched from the northeast to the south. His buildings were landmarks in major cities, symbols of progress and modernity. But at that moment, while holding a glass of Dom Pérignon champagne and talking with other magnates about investments and future markets, his eyes instinctively searched for two small figures running between the elegant tables. Michael and Matthew, his 5-year-old twins, were the reason Jonathan still believed that life had meaning. After losing his wife in an accident 3 years earlier, the boys had become his world, his anchor, the only thing that prevented him from completely losing himself in work and business. Dressed in identical navy blue suits, red bow ties, and gleaming Italian leather shoes, they looked like two little princes running through their father's glass kingdom. On the other side of the city, in the dusty streets of East Side Heights, Isabella Silva Martinez walked barefoot through narrow alleys, carrying a torn plastic bag with a few coins she had earned selling candy at a traffic light on the freeway. At 11 years old, she already carried on her thin shoulders the weight of responsibilities that many adults couldn't bear. Her mother, Consuelo, had been hospitalized for 2 weeks at the county hospital with severe pneumonia, and little Daniel, her 7-year-old brother, had been left in her care. Hunger was a constant companion in Isabella's life. Not the romantic hunger of fairy tales, but real painful hunger that hurt the stomach and made the head dizzy. That afternoon, after 3 days of eating only stale bread and water, she decided she needed to do something. She had heard other children from the neighborhood talk about how sometimes they got leftover food from rich people's parties, how some doormen took pity and gave them leftovers that would otherwise go to waste. That's how Isabella found herself at the back of the Summit Tower, watching kitchen staff who came down to smoke cigarettes at the emergency exit. Her childish mind, sharpened by necessity, began to work. If she could get up to where the party was happening, maybe she could grab some leftovers, some canapes that nobody would miss. It wasn't stealing, she thought, it was surviving. While Isabella planned her clandestine entry into the building up on the terrace, Jonathan was trying to maintain a civilized conversation with Richard Vance, a partner at an investment bank who was interested in financing his next development in San Diego. But his attention was divided between the numbers Richard was presenting and the movements of his sons, who were playing chase with something flying in the wind. Carmen Rodriguez, the twins' nanny, a 50-year-old woman who had worked for the family for 2 years, was sitting at a table off to the side, using her cell phone and responding to WhatsApp messages. She was a good employee, affectionate with the children, but at that moment she was distracted by her own family problems. Her daughter had fought with her husband and was threatening to separate, and Carmen was trying to give advice through text messages without noticing that Michael and Matthew had moved farther and farther away from the central tables. The twins discovered that a linen napkin had escaped from one of the tables and was now dancing in the wind like a white butterfly. To them, this was the most fascinating thing in the world at that moment. They ran after the napkin, laughing and trying to catch it as it flew toward the edge of the terrace. The parapet of the Golden View was an architectural work of art, tempered glass interspersed with stainless steel structures, creating an illusion of safety that hid small gaps between the sections. Isabella had managed to enter the building. Using her street child agility, she waited for a group of waiters to enter through the service doors and blended in with them, keeping her head down and walking as if she knew exactly where she was going. Her tattered clothes contrasted drastically with the luxurious environment, but the party's hustle helped her go unnoticed by the busy staff. When she finally reached the terrace, Isabella was paralyzed for a moment. She had never seen so much wealth gathered in one place. Tables covered with silk tablecloths, arrangements of exotic flowers that cost more than she saw in months, fine porcelain plates with foods she didn't even know existed. Her hungry eyes scanned every detail, engraving in her memory this world that seemed to exist in another dimension. That's when she saw them, two identical boys dressed like little adults, running after something white that was flying in the wind. They were approaching dangerously close to the edge of the terrace, and by their movements, Isabella realized they didn't understand the danger. Her street life experience had developed in her a keen survival instinct, and she immediately recognized a risky situation. Michael caught the napkin first, but the wind snatched it from his small hands and carried it beyond the parapet. Matthew, not wanting to be outdone by his brother, began to climb the steel structure that separated the terrace from the 64-story abyss. Michael, seeing his brother climb, did the same. Isabella felt her heart race. She looked around, searching for any adult who might be paying attention to the children, but everyone was absorbed in their elegant conversations, in their important business, in their rich people problems. Not even the nanny was looking in the right direction. The twins managed to pass through one of the gaps in the parapet and were now on the outside of the terrace, stepping on a metal structure that wasn't designed to support the weight of two children. Their small hands clung to the railing, but the strong wind at that height was making it difficult to maintain balance. It was at this moment that everything happened very quickly. Michael slipped first. His small hands managed to grab onto the metal structure at the last second, leaving him hanging on the outside of the building. The scream of terror he let out startled Matthew, causing him to lose his balance too. In a matter of seconds, both boys were hanging in the air, with only their childish strength preventing them from plummeting. Michael's shrill scream finally caught the adult's attention. The first to notice was a waiter who dropped the tray of canapés he was carrying. The sound of porcelain shattering on the marble floor made all heads turn toward the edge of the terrace. Jonathan turned instinctively in the direction of his sons and felt the world collapse when he saw only two small hands desperately clinging to the metal structure. His first impulse was to run, but his legs seemed to have turned to lead. The shock was so great that for a few seconds he couldn't move. Carmen dropped her phone and stood up with a jump, shouting the boys' names. Other guests began to realize what was happening. Some screamed. Others took out their phones to film or call for help. Many were paralyzed by the horror of the situation. But Isabella didn't think twice. She had spent her entire life reacting quickly to dangerous situations, and her instincts took over. Without hesitating for a second, she ran toward the edge of the terrace, pushing chairs and dodging hands that tried to stop her. Some adults shouted for her to stop, that it was too dangerous, that she should wait for the firefighters to arrive. But Isabella knew there was no time. She could see by the desperate movements of the boys that they wouldn't be able to hold on much longer. She threw herself to her knees at the edge of the terrace and leaned over the parapet, extending her thin arms toward the twins. Matthew was already slipping, his small fingers losing strength. Isabella managed to grab his right wrist at the exact moment he was about to let go. The wind was blowing hard at that height, making Isabella's hair fly in all directions and hindering her vision. With her left hand, she stretched as far as possible to reach Michael, who was a few centimeters farther away. Her small, dirty nails managed to dig into the fabric of his suit sleeve and then found his wrist. Now she was holding both boys, one in each hand, suspended over the abyss of the city of Los Angeles. Her arms ached intensely, and she could feel that she wouldn't be able to maintain that position for long. Bracing her feet against the base of the parapet, she locked her body and began to pull the boys back to the safety of the terrace. The strength Isabella needed to pull Matthew back to the terrace was beyond anything an 11-year-old girl should be able to endure. Her muscles screamed in pain. Her fingers were beginning to lose feeling, but she didn't let go. She couldn't let go. With a movement that mixed desperation and determination, she managed to lift the first twin and pull him over the parapet. Matthew fell onto the marble floor of the terrace, crying uncontrollably, scratched up and in complete panic. His small hands immediately grabbed onto Isabella's worn-out blouse, as if she were his only anchor in a world that had suddenly become too dangerous. But Michael was still hanging from the outside of the building. Isabella could feel that he was losing strength, his fingers slowly slipping from the metal structure. Without hesitation, she rotated her own body over the parapet, passing one leg over the structure to have more reach and stability. It was an extremely risky maneuver that made several adults scream even louder. Carmen had finally managed to get close to the edge and was shouting desperate instructions to Isabella, but her words were lost in the wind and the chaos of voices that had taken over the terrace. Jonathan remained paralyzed a few meters back, his successful businessman's mind completely unable to process the situation unfolding before his eyes. With one last effort that seemed to drain all the energy she had in her body, Isabella managed to lift Michael and pull him back to safety. The boy fell on top of her and both collapsed onto the terrace floor in a tangle of arms and legs, exhausted but alive. The silence that followed was deafening. For a few seconds that seemed like an eternity. No one on the terrace moved. Then, as if someone had turned the sound back on, the place exploded in voices, screams, crying, and frantic movement. Michael and Matthew clung to Isabella as if she were their mother, crying and shaking, but clearly alive and relatively unharmed. She hugged them back, feeling a strange mixture of relief, exhaustion, and fear. Fear of having exposed herself too much, of having drawn too much attention to herself, of now having to face the consequences of being in a place where she shouldn't have been. It was then that Jonathan finally managed to move. He ran across the terrace like he had never run in his life, pushing people out of the way, his face pale and his eyes still full of terror at what he had almost lost. When he reached where the 3 children were, Jonathan fell to his knees on the cold marble floor and pulled his sons into his arms, hugging them with a force that seemed to want to fuse them to his body. Tears he didn't even know he was capable of shedding streamed down his face, wetting the twins' disheveled hair. Michael and Matthew cried in their father's arms, but their eyes kept turning to Isabella, who remained sitting on the floor, observing the scene with an expression that mixed relief and apprehension. For the boys, she had become something magical in those terrible minutes. A protective figure who appeared from nowhere to save them when the world became too dangerous. Jonathan raised his eyes and met Isabella's gaze. For a long moment, the two stared at each other in silence. He saw a girl who was much too thin, with clothes that had known better days long ago, hair disheveled by the wind, small and dirty hands that had just saved the 2 most precious things in his world. She saw a man who seemed to have aged 10 years in a few minutes, dressed in a suit that cost more than she saw in years, with eyes that expressed a gratitude so deep that she didn't know how to interpret it. Neither said a word, but something passed between them in that look. Something that would change their lives forever. The building security finally arrived, followed by firefighters that someone had called. The terrace filled with uniforms and equipment, all arriving too late to be useful, but ready to take control of the situation now that the danger had passed. The restaurant manager, August Silver, a 50-year-old man who had managed the Golden View for a decade, was visibly nervous. He had built his career offering impeccable events for the Los Angeles elite, and this was exactly the kind of situation that could destroy his reputation in a matter of hours. When August learned that there was an unauthorized child on the terrace, a girl who clearly didn't belong in that environment, his first reaction was irritation and concern about the legal implications. He approached Isabella with the intention of removing her from the location as discreetly as possible, before more people could notice her presence. But when the guests began to tell what had happened, when it became clear that this girl had saved the sons of one of the richest and most influential men in Los Angeles, August found himself in a completely different situation than he had imagined. Some of the guests were filming with their cell phones, capturing the final moments of the rescue and the emotional reactions that followed. Helen Marcus, wife of a congressman and one of the most well-known social organizers in the city, was already posting on her social media about the miracle she had witnessed. Isabella tried to stand up to leave, but her legs were too shaky after the physical and emotional effort she had made. Carmen approached her with a glass of water and a clean napkin so she could dry her sweaty face. "Are you okay, sweetie?" Carmen asked with a gentle voice, but Isabella only shook her head, not really knowing how to respond. She wasn't used to adults speaking to her in that caring way, and all that attention made her uncomfortable. Jonathan finally managed to calm down enough to stand up, still keeping his sons close to him. He approached Isabella again, crouching in front of her to be at the same height. "What's your name?" he asked with a softer voice than she had imagined such an elegant man could have. "Isabella," she answered softly, almost whispering. "Isabella," he repeated, as if testing the sound of the name in his mouth. "You saved my sons. You saved everything." She didn't know what to respond to that. In her experience, rich adults usually blamed poor children for any problem that arose, not thanked them. She was expecting to be thrown out, maybe even taken to the police for having invaded the party. Michael freed himself from his father's arms and approached Isabella, still with tears in his eyes but already calmer. "Thank you for saving me," he said with the seriousness of a child who had gone through something he couldn't fully understand, but knew had been important. Matthew did the same, hugging Isabella in a way that she had never been hugged before, with total trust and affection. For the twins, she wasn't an intruder or a street child. She was the person who had appeared when they needed her most, and that was all that mattered. Dr. Robert Sanders, one of the guests who was a pediatrician at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, approached to examine the children and ensure they were really okay. He checked the scratches on Michael and Matthew's arms, verified there were no signs of more serious injuries, and then turned his attention to Isabella. "You need to be examined too," he said gently. "Given the effort you made, it's important to make sure you weren't hurt." Isabella tried to refuse, but Dr. Robert insisted, and she ended up allowing him to check her hands and arms. There were some scratches from her movements over the parapet, and her hands were hurt from the effort of holding the weight of the two boys, but nothing that was really serious. Meanwhile, Helen Marcus had managed to capture some images of the interaction between Jonathan, the twins, and Isabella. She knew she had witnessed something special, something that would touch people's hearts if it was shared in the right way. Her experience in public relations and social events made her understand the human potential of that story. August continued to be concerned about the legal and logistical implications of the situation. He approached Jonathan to discreetly discuss how to proceed, but was interrupted by Martha Andrews, Jonathan's aunt and one of the family matriarchs, a 70-year-old lady who had watched everything with a mixture of horror and admiration. "This girl is an angel," she said loudly, so that everyone around could hear. In a world full of people who only look, she was the only one who acted, the only one who had courage. Martha's words echoed across the terrace, and many of the guests agreed, some visibly embarrassed for having been paralyzed during the crisis. The atmosphere had completely changed. What began as an elegant celebration had transformed into something much deeper and more significant. The crowd on the terrace began to disperse slowly, but Jonathan showed no rush to move away from Isabella. He remained crouched in front of her, observing every detail of the childish face that had become the face of salvation for his sons. There was something in the girl's eyes that intrigued him, a premature wisdom, a maturity that shouldn't exist in an 11-year-old child. Helen Marcus approached the group, her phone still in hand. "Jonathan, I need to talk to you about this," she said, discreetly indicating the phone screen. "The video is already spreading on social media. In 2 hours, this will be in every newspaper in the country." Jonathan turned to Helen with an expression of surprise. "What video?" "Someone filmed everything. The moment the children fell, when she ran to save them, the rescue, it's all recorded, and people are sharing it like crazy. It already has more than 100,000 views." Isabella felt a shiver of fear run down her spine. She didn't want to appear on video, didn't want anyone to know who she was or where she came from. Her life experience had taught her that too much attention usually meant too much trouble. "I need to leave," she murmured, trying to stand up again. "Wait," Jonathan said gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Please, don't go yet. I need to thank you properly." Isabella looked around and realized that several people were still looking at her, some whispering among themselves, others discreetly taking photos with their cell phones. The feeling of being observed made her extremely uncomfortable. Carmen approached with a plate of food she had taken from one of the tables. "You must be hungry, dear. When was the last time you ate something?" The question hit Isabella like a punch to the stomach. She had completely forgotten about the hunger that had brought her there. But now, with the mention of food and the delicious smell that rose from the plate, her stomach growled loud enough for everyone around to hear. Michael and Matthew looked at her with curiosity. "Why were you here?" Matthew asked with the typical innocence of a 5-year-old child. Isabella didn't know how to answer. How could she explain to 2 children, who lived in a world of abundance, that she had invaded their party because she hadn't had anything to eat for days. How could she make them understand a type of life that they didn't even know existed? Jonathan noticed her discomfort and intervened. She was here because she had to be. Sometimes destiny puts the right people in the right place at the right time. Dr. Robert approached again, this time carrying a bag with some medical supplies. I brought some bandages for the scratches, and I also think it would be good if you had some more detailed exams. I can arrange an appointment at the hospital if you want. Isabella quickly shook her head. No need for a doctor, everything's fine. But Martha had heard the conversation and approached with her matriarch authority. Young lady, you just did something that could have resulted in serious injuries for you. Taking care of your health after a situation like this is not optional. The gentle firmness in Martha's voice reminded Isabella of her own grandmother, who had passed away a few years earlier, and who always insisted that she take care of herself even when it seemed impossible. For the first time since everything had begun, she felt tears threatening to appear in her eyes. August finally gathered the courage to approach Jonathan. Mr. Andrews, we need to talk about the legal situation. The girl, well, she technically invaded the property, and we have protocols that we need to follow. Jonathan turned to August with an expression that the manager had never seen before, a mixture of absolute gratitude and iron determination. August, this girl saved my sons. If you think I'm going to allow anyone to treat her like an intruder after what she did, you're very mistaken. But sir, they are standard procedures. Standard procedures don't apply to heroes, Jonathan interrupted dryly. And that's exactly what she is. Helen had continued monitoring social media and approached again. Jonathan, you need to see this. The video has already surpassed 1 million views. People are calling her Angel of Los Angeles, Miracle Girl. This has become a national phenomenon. Isabella felt anxiety growing in her chest. She didn't fully understand what all these words about videos and social media meant, but by the reaction of the people around, she realized that something very big was happening, and she was at the center of it all. I don't want to be famous, she said quietly, but loud enough for Jonathan to hear. He leaned closer to her. Why not? Because bad things happen when you draw too much attention, she responded, revealing more about her worldview than she had intended. Jonathan felt his heart tighten upon hearing those words. What kind of life had an 11-year-old child lived to develop this perspective? What experiences had taught her that visibility meant danger? Carmen had observed the entire interaction and approached again. Isabella, dear, where are your parents? They must be worried, not knowing where you are. My mother is in the hospital, Isabella responded simply. And your father? I don't have a father. The simplicity of the response and the way it was said, without self-pity or drama, just as a fact of life, made the hearts of several people around tighten. Jonathan, who had lost his wife and knew how difficult it was to raise children alone, even with all the resources in the world, began to better understand where this girl's premature maturity came from. Which hospital? Dr. Robert asked gently. County General, she has pneumonia. Dr. Robert exchanged a significant look with Jonathan. County General was public, which meant long lines, limited resources, and a family financial situation that was probably very complicated. Michael pulled on his father's shirt. Daddy, can she have dinner with us tonight? The innocent question from his son made Jonathan smile for the first time since everything had begun. Of course she can, if she wants to. But Isabella shook her head. I have to go back home. My brother is waiting for me. Your brother, how old is he? Carmen asked. 7. The information hit the adults present like lightning. An 11-year-old girl taking care of a 7-year-old brother alone while the mother was hospitalized. The social reality of America was revealed there, raw and real, drastically contrasting with the luxury environment of the terrace. Helen approached Jonathan and whispered something in his ear. He nodded and then addressed Isabella again. Isabella, I'd like to do something for you, as a way of thanking you for what you did for my sons. She looked at him with suspicion. I don't need to give me money. The response surprised Jonathan. He had expected her to ask for something, to take advantage of the situation, to gain some benefit. But she was refusing help before even knowing what was being offered. It's not about money, he said gently. It's about ensuring that you and your brother are okay, that your mother receives the best possible treatment, that you have what you need. Isabella remained suspicious. Why? You don't even know me. Because you saved my sons. Because you showed a courage that few adults would have. Because... He paused, looking for the right words. Because I believe that when someone does something extraordinary, the world should respond in an extraordinary way. Martha approached and placed a gentle hand on Isabella's shoulder. Dear, sometimes in life an opportunity for change appears. It's not wrong to accept help, especially when you deserve it. Dr. Robert intervened again. I can arrange for your mother to be transferred to a private hospital where she will receive specialized care, and we can also ensure that you and your brother have adequate medical follow-up. Isabella looked around at all those well-dressed, well-fed people who lived in a world completely different from hers. Part of her wanted to accept, wanted to believe that people like this could really help without wanting something in return. But another part of her, the part that had learned to survive on the streets, screamed that this was too good to be true. I need to think about it, she finally said. Jonathan smiled. Of course. But while you think, will you at least have dinner with us? And let me take you home afterward. I want to meet your brother and make sure you got home safely. For the first time since everything had begun, Isabella smiled back. A small, hesitant smile, but genuine. Okay. And that's how a girl from East Side Heights found herself dining at one of the most elegant tables in Los Angeles, surrounded by people who a few hours earlier were complete strangers, but who now seemed determined to change her life forever. The dinner on the terrace had transformed into something completely different from what Jonathan had planned for his birthday celebration. The elegant tables that previously hosted conversations about business and investments now witnessed something much more significant. An 11-year-old girl experiencing high-end restaurant food for the first time in her life, while telling stories of survival that made the adults around reflect on their own privileged lives. Isabella had eaten with a hunger that went beyond the physical. It was the hunger of someone who didn't know when the next meal would be, and she alternated between devouring the delicious food and discreetly saving pieces in the pockets of her worn-out blouse, thinking of the brother who was at home. Michael and Matthew didn't leave her side, fascinated by this girl who had become their personal heroine. They asked endless questions about where she lived, what her house was like, if she had toys, if she knew other heroes like her. Isabella answered with patience, but carefully edited her responses to not frighten the children with the raw reality of her life. When the sun began to set over Los Angeles, tinting the sky with golden and orange tones that reflected in the glass of the surrounding buildings, Jonathan stood up from the table. I think it's time to take you home, he said gently to Isabella. Your brother must be worried. Isabella nodded, feeling a strange mixture of relief and sadness. Relief to finally be able to return to her familiar world, and sadness to leave this place where, for the first time in her life, she had felt truly protected and cared for. Carmen prepared a bag with extra food from dinner. For you and your brother, she said with a maternal smile. And I also put in some bandages and basic medicines that Dr. Robert said might be useful. Helen approached Jonathan while he called the elevator. Are you sure about this? Going there? It could be complicated. Jonathan faced her with a serious expression. Helen, she saved my sons. There's no place in this city I wouldn't go to make sure she's okay. Dr. Robert joined them in the elevator, carrying a small medical bag. If I may, I'd like to accompany you. I want to examine her brother and see if I can help with the mother's situation at the hospital. Martha, despite her advanced age, also insisted on accompanying the group. This girl touched my heart, she said simply. I need to see where so much courage came from. Jonathan's driver, Ben Thomas, a 60-year-old man who had worked for the family for more than a decade, was visibly surprised when he received the address where they should go. Mr. Andrews, are you sure about the address? It's in the projects. I'm sure, Ben, and drive slowly. I want us all to arrive safely. The journey back to East Side Heights was a revealing experience for everyone in the car. Isabella, seated between Michael and Matthew in the back seat of Jonathan's armored BMW, watched through the tinted window how the city landscape gradually changed. The elegant buildings of the center gave way to simpler constructions, the well-paved streets became more potholed, and public lighting became scarcer. For Michael and Matthew, this was the first time they had left the protective bubble in which they lived. They pressed their little faces against the window, fascinated by the stark difference between the world in which they had grown up and the one that Isabella called home. "Why are the houses so small here?" Michael asked with the innocent curiosity of a child. "Because not everyone has money for a big house," Isabella responded simply, without any trace of bitterness in her voice. "But why do some people have a lot of money and others have nothing?" Matthew wanted to know. The question hit all the adults in the car like a stone. It was a question that summarized centuries of American social inequality, formulated by the innocent mouth of a 5-year-old child. Jonathan turned from the front seat. "It's a very difficult question to answer, Matthew. But sometimes, when we meet people like Isabella, we understand that the most important thing isn't how much money someone has, but what kind of person they are." When they arrived at the entrance to the neighborhood, Ben stopped the car. "Mr. Andrews, I think it's better if I wait here. The car might attract too much attention inside." Jonathan looked around and realized that they were already being observed by several people. The black BMW with tinted windows definitely stood out in the environment. "You're right, Ben. We'll go on foot from here." Isabella got out of the car and immediately felt more at home. These were her familiar smells, her known sounds, her usual streets. But there was something different now. She was returning accompanied by people who represented a completely different world, and this made her nervous about how the neighbors would react. "Come, it's this way," she said, beginning to walk through the narrow alleys of the community. The walk was revealing for everyone. Jonathan, who had built buildings all over the country, had never really walked through a poor neighborhood like this. He observed the houses built one on top of another, the ingenuity of residents to solve basic problems like water and energy, the community life that pulsated at every corner. Martha, supported by Dr. Robert's arm, walked slowly but with determination. Her glasses reflected everything she saw, recording every detail in the memory of her 70 years of life. Michael and Matthew each held one of Isabella's hands, completely fascinated by this new world. For them it wasn't a place of poverty or lack, but rather a great adventure, a place full of life and movement that was completely different from the gated communities where they had grown up. Isabella stopped in front of a small 2-room shack built with wooden planks and some bricks. The structure was precarious, but it was clean and organized in the best possible way. "It's here," she said, climbing the 3 improvised steps that led to the front door. Before she could open the door, a childish voice shouted from inside, "Izzy, you took so long." I was scared. The door opened and a thin boy with disheveled hair and clothes that were clean but visibly mended ran to hug Isabella. This was Daniel, and the relief on his face at seeing his sister was palpable. Daniel stopped mid-hug when he realized that Isabella wasn't alone. His eyes widened at seeing those well-dressed strangers standing in front of his house. "Izzy, who are they?" he asked softly, but still loud enough for everyone to hear. "They're friends," she answered, not knowing exactly how to explain the situation. "They helped me today." Jonathan crouched down to be at Daniel's height. "Hi, Daniel. My name is Jonathan. These are my sons, Michael and Matthew, and your sister. Your sister saved their lives today." Daniel looked at Isabella with a mixture of confusion and pride. "What do you mean, saved?" "It's a long story," Isabella said. "I'll tell you later. Do you want to come in?" she asked hesitantly to the group. The interior of the shack was small but lovingly organized. There were 2 mattresses on the floor, separated by an improvised curtain, a small kitchen with a 2-burner stove and some basic utensils. On the wall, some family photos and drawings that Daniel had made at school. Martha observed everything in silence, her eyes filling with tears as she realized how these children lived. Dr. Robert discreetly examined the hygiene and health conditions of the environment, making mental notes about what could be improved. Michael and Matthew were fascinated. For them, this place had a special charm, an intimacy and simplicity that dramatically contrasted with the huge toy-filled rooms where they slept every night. Daniel brought 2 small plastic stools, which were the only seats available besides the mattresses. "Please sit down," he said with the politeness that Isabella had taught him. Jonathan sat on one of the stools and pulled Isabella close to him. "Daniel, your sister did something very brave today. She saved Michael and Matthew when they were in danger." Daniel looked at his sister with growing admiration. I always knew you were special, Izzy. Dr. Robert approached Daniel with his medical bag. Daniel, will you allow me to examine you, just to make sure you're okay? While Dr. Robert examined Daniel, Jonathan quietly talked with Isabella about her mother's situation in the hospital and about the immediate needs of the family. Martha played with Michael and Matthew, who were exploring Daniel's drawings hanging on the wall. It was when Jonathan asked a question that would change everything. Isabella, would you like me to help you visit your mother in the hospital tomorrow? Her answer revealed something none of them expected. I can't visit her. They only let adults in, and I don't have anyone to take me. The reality of that situation hit everyone in the small room like a punch to the stomach. An 11-year-old girl, taking care of her brother alone, with her mother hospitalized for weeks, unable to even visit her due to lack of a responsible adult to accompany her. Jonathan stood up slowly, his businessman's mind already working to find solutions. That's going to change starting tomorrow, he said with determination. We'll go to the hospital together, and we'll ensure that your mother receives the best possible treatment. But when Isabella tried to protest, concerned about the costs and implications, Martha gently interrupted her. Dear, when an angel saves 2 lives, heaven moves to reciprocate, and we are the instruments of that movement. The next morning, Jonathan arrived in East Side Heights at 8 o'clock sharp, driving a more discreet car and accompanied only by Dr. Robert. The night had been long for him, full of phone calls and arrangements he had made to ensure that Consuelo, Isabella's mother, could be transferred to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, where she would receive specialized care. Isabella and Daniel were waiting for him at the door of the shack, wearing their best clothes, which even so were visibly mended and faded. Isabella had woken up before sunrise, anxious and nervous about seeing her mother again after 2 weeks of forced separation. During the journey to the hospital, Dr. Robert gently explained to the children what they would find there. Your mother will be connected to some machines that are helping her breathe better. It might seem scary at first, but it's all to help her get better. When they arrived at County General Hospital, Jonathan immediately noticed the difference in treatment they received. Nurses who previously barely looked at Isabella when she tried to get information about her mother now showed themselves to be solicitous and attentive, clearly influenced by the presence of a rich, well-dressed man. Consuelo Martinez was in bed 15 of the pulmonology wing, connected to assisted breathing apparatus and IV. At 32, she looked older due to years of hard work and deprivation, but her eyes lit up like stars when she saw her children enter the room. My babies, she whispered with a hoarse voice, extending her weak arms toward Isabella and Daniel. The reunion was too emotional for words. Isabella clung to her mother as if she wanted to transfer all her vital force to her, while Daniel silently cried, holding Consuelo's thin hand between his small ones. Jonathan and Dr. Robert remained discreetly apart during the first few minutes, allowing the family to have their privacy. But when Consuelo finally noticed the presence of the 2 strange men, her eyes filled with confusion and concern. Izzy, who are these people? Why did they come here with you? Isabella looked at Jonathan, not knowing exactly how to explain everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. Mom, this is an unbelievable story. I saved his sons yesterday. Consuelo furrowed her brow, trying to process the information. What do you mean saved? It was then that Jonathan approached the bed and, with a delicacy that surprised even himself, began to tell the whole story. From the moment he saw his sons hanging from the edge of the terrace to the extraordinary courage that Isabella had demonstrated by risking her own life to save them. Consuelo listened in silence, her eyes alternating between Jonathan and her daughter, gradually understanding the magnitude of what had happened. When he finished telling the story, she remained silent for a long time, just looking at Isabella, with an expression that mixed pride, love, and amazement. My daughter has always been special, she finally said, her voice still weak but loaded with emotion. Even when she was little, she always took care of everyone. But this is more than I ever imagined she was capable of. Dr. Robert approached delicately. Mrs. Martinez, I'm a doctor, and I'd like to talk to you about your treatment. Mr. Andrews has arranged for you to be transferred to a private hospital where you can receive specialized care. Consuelo tried to sit up in bed, agitated. No, I can't accept this. We can't pay... Jonathan gently interrupted her. Mrs. Martinez, Your daughter saved the two most precious things in my life. There is no amount of money in the world that would be enough to pay for that. Please let me do this for your family." But Consuelo shook her head, her tears beginning to flow. "You don't understand. People like us, we can't accept help like this. There's always a price afterward. There's always something you'll want in return." The response hit Jonathan like a slap. He realized that his privileged life experience had never allowed him to understand how people in vulnerable situations viewed gestures of help coming from rich people. For Consuelo, this wasn't generosity. It was a transaction whose terms she didn't know. "Mrs. Martinez," Jonathan said, sitting in the chair next to the bed, "may I tell you a story?" She nodded hesitantly. "When I was 8 years old, I got lost in a mall. My parents were busy in a store, and I ran off after a toy I had seen in a window display. When I realized it, I was completely lost, crying in the middle of hundreds of people who passed by me without noticing. Isabella and Daniel listened attentively, never having imagined that such a powerful man could have been a frightened child. It was a woman who helped me, a simple woman who worked as a janitor in the mall. She stopped what she was doing, knelt down to my height, consoled me, and stayed with me until my parents found me. I never knew her name. I never saw her again. But she changed my life that day because she taught me that kindness exists without expecting anything in return." Consuelo listened in silence, her tears now falling more freely. "Your daughter reminded me of that woman yesterday. She didn't think twice before risking her own life for 2 children she didn't even know, and now I have the opportunity to give back a little of the kindness that exists in this world. Please don't deny me that chance." Daniel, who had remained quiet during the entire conversation, approached his mother. "Mum, he seems to be a good person, and Izzy really did save his sons. I think we can trust him." Dr. Robert took advantage of the moment to intervene with concrete medical information. "Mrs. Martinez, your pneumonia case is getting complicated. Here at the public hospital with the system overload, the treatment can be slower. At Cedars-Sinai, we can initiate a more aggressive treatment protocol that can significantly accelerate your recovery." It was then that Consuelo asked a question that none of them expected. "And after I get better, what happens to my children when you get tired of playing nice?" The question revealed Consuelo's true fear. It wasn't pride or reluctance to accept help. It was the maternal terror of allowing her children to get used to a life that could disappear from one day to the next, leaving them even more lost than before. Jonathan swallowed hard, realizing that he had reached the crucial moment of the whole situation. "Mrs. Martinez, may I make a promise to you?" She nodded, her eyes fixed on his. "I promise that regardless of what happens to me, regardless of any circumstance in my life, your children will always have guaranteed education, guaranteed medical care, and a roof over their heads. It's not charity. It's gratitude. It's recognition. It's ensuring that your daughter's courage is honored forever." Consuelo closed her eyes, feeling the weight of a decision that would change the course of their lives forever. When she opened them again, she looked directly at Isabella. "Daughter, what do you think? You saved these children. Do you trust this man?" Isabella thought for a long moment, remembering how Jonathan had treated her and Daniel the night before, how he had knelt on the cold floor of the shack to talk to them, how his eyes had filled with genuine tears when he understood the situation in which they lived. "I trust him, Mom. He's different." It was then that something happened that none of them expected. Consuelo began to cry, but they weren't tears of sadness or fear. They were tears of relief. Relief for finally being able to allow someone to take care of her family. Relief for her children having a chance at a different future. Relief for being able to concentrate on getting better without worrying if her babies were hungry or cold. "All right," she whispered. "I accept your help, but with one condition." "Anything," Jonathan immediately responded. "I want my children to never forget where they came from. I want them to always remember that true wealth isn't in money, but in the courage to do what's right when no one is watching." Jonathan smiled, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. "That's a condition I can not only accept, but admire. And I can guarantee that my sons will also learn that lesson." Doctor Robert took advantage of the moment to begin explaining the next steps of the medical treatment, but Isabella was focused on something different. She held her mother's hand and said quietly, "Mom, I think our life is going to change a lot. Consuelo squeezed her daughter's hand. It already has, my love. The moment you decided to save those children, our life changed forever. Now we just need to have the courage to live that change. 6 months later, life had transformed in ways that none of them could have predicted on that fateful afternoon on the terrace of the Golden View. Consuelo had completely recovered from pneumonia and now worked as a cleaning supervisor at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center itself, a job that Jonathan had helped her get, but which she kept through her own merits and dedication. Isabella and Daniel lived in a simple but comfortable house in Silver Lake, a few minutes from the private school where they studied. The house had 3 bedrooms, a complete kitchen, a living room where they could watch television together, and a small backyard where Daniel planted flowers that he had learned to care for in science class. But perhaps the most important change wasn't material. It was the transformation that had happened in everyone involved in that story. Isabella, now 12 years old, discovered that she had an exceptional intelligence that had been dormant for years of struggle for basic survival. At school, her teachers were impressed with her learning capacity and her emotional maturity. She especially stood out in mathematics and English, but also showed a natural aptitude for leadership, always being the first to help classmates who had difficulties. Daniel flourished in a way that surprised everyone. The shy and frightened boy transformed into a confident and happy child who made friends easily and showed remarkable artistic talent. His drawings decorated not only the wall of his own room, but also Jonathan's office, who had framed several of the boy's creations. Michael and Matthew, in turn, had developed a special relationship with the Martinez siblings. Every weekend, the 2 families got together, sometimes at Isabella and Daniel's house, sometimes at Jonathan's penthouse apartment. The twins had learned to value simple things that they previously took for granted, and frequently asked their father to take them to play in the community where Isabella had grown up, developing genuine friendships with other children. Jonathan discovered that gratitude had changed his own perspective on success and happiness. He was still the same successful businessman, but now dedicated a significant part of his time and resources to social projects, especially educational programs for children in underprivileged communities. His company had created a scholarship program that already benefited more than 200 families. Carmen, the twins' nanny, had become almost a grandmother to Isabella and Daniel. She visited them regularly, taught recipes to Consuelo, and brought small handmade gifts. The experience had shown her how genuine human connections could be more valuable than any salary. Martha, even with her advanced age, had become a kind of mentor for Isabella. Every Thursday, they met for long conversations about books, history, and life philosophy. The family matriarch had found in Isabella a kindred spirit, someone who shared her belief that courage and kindness were the true pillars of a life well lived. Doctor Robert had become the Martinez family's doctor, but more than that, a true friend who monitored not only their physical health, but also the emotional well-being of everyone. He had organized a preventive medical assistance program for the entire East Side Heights community, inspired by Isabella's story. But it was on a September morning, almost a year after the incident on the terrace, that the most surprising revelation of that entire journey happened. Jonathan had arrived for the weekend breakfast at the Silver Lake house, as had become customary. Consuelo was preparing her famous pancakes while the children played in the backyard. It was a family scene that warmed Jonathan's heart in a way he hadn't expected. Isabella approached him in the kitchen, holding an envelope that she had kept for months. "Jonathan, I need to tell you something," she said, with a seriousness that caught everyone's attention in the house. He knelt down to be at her height, as he had learned to do on that first day. "What is it, dear? Remember when you asked me why I was on the terrace that day? Why I had gone up there? I remember. You said you were hungry." Isabella took a deep breath. That was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. Consuelo stopped stirring the pancakes and turned to listen. Daniel, Michael, and Matthew also stopped playing and approached, sensing that something important was being said. "The truth is that I knew who you were," Isabella continued. "I had seen your photo in the newspaper a few weeks earlier, when they announced that your company was going to build a housing complex near our community." Jonathan furrowed his brow, confused. "You knew who I was?" "Yes, and I knew your sons would be at the party, and I went up there because I wanted to talk to you." The silence in the kitchen was palpable. Jonathan felt his heart racing, not knowing what to expect from the revelation that was to come. Isabella opened the envelope she was holding and took out a newspaper photo that had been cut out. It was an image of Jonathan inaugurating one of his buildings, but in the margin of the photo, there was something written in Isabella's childish handwriting. "I wanted to ask you not to build the housing complex," she said quietly. "Not because I didn't want people to have better houses, but because I had discovered that you were going to tear down the community school where my mother studied when she was a child." Consuelo approached, her tears already beginning to flow. "Isabella, you never told me this." "Because I didn't get to talk to him that day. When I arrived on the terrace, everything happened so fast. And afterward, when I saved Michael and Matthew, I realized that maybe God had sent me there for a different reason than I thought." Jonathan took the photo from Isabella's hands, reading the words she had written in the margin. "Please don't tear down my mother's school. It's the only place where children from the community can study at night." The revelation hit Jonathan like lightning. He vaguely remembered the discussions about that project, about how the community school was occupying land that technically belonged to the city, about how it would be necessary to relocate some activities to make way for the new development. "You climbed 64 floors, invaded a private party, risked being arrested to save a school?" he asked, his voice loaded with emotion. Isabella nodded. "My mother always said that it was at school that she learned to dream, that it was there that she met my father, that she understood that she could be more than everyone expected of her. I couldn't let that be taken away from other children." Jonathan stood up slowly, still processing that information. He walked to the kitchen window, looking at the backyard where his own sons were playing with Daniel, all of them having their lives transformed because of this girl's courage. "Do you know what happened with that project?" he asked, turning to Isabella. She shook her head. "After everything that happened, I forgot about that story." Jonathan smiled, but it was a smile mixed with tears. "The project was cancelled 2 weeks after the incident on the terrace. I couldn't stop thinking about you, about the courage you had shown, and I began to question whether all my projects really did good for the people who already lived in the places where I built." Consuelo covered her mouth with her hands, too emotional to speak. "And do you know what I did instead?" Jonathan continued. "I renovated the community school. I brought in qualified teachers, new equipment, a library, a computer lab, and I built the housing complex on another plot of land, one that was actually mine, where I didn't need to take anything away from anyone." Isabella stared at him with amazement. "You did that?" "Yes. Because an 11-year-old girl taught me that sometimes the most important constructions are the ones that already exist, the ones that already have history and meaning for people." Michael and Matthew had heard part of the conversation and approached. "Daddy, does that mean that Izzy saved us twice?" Matthew asked with the simple logic of a child. Jonathan laughed, picking up his son in his arms. "What do you mean twice? She saved us when we were about to fall, and she saved the school for the other children too, so she saved a lot of people." Matthew's observation made everyone in the kitchen laugh and cry at the same time. It was true. Isabella had saved much more than 2 lives that day. She had saved a school. She had saved the dreams of dozens of children. She had saved the soul of a businessman who was losing the connection with the real purpose of his work. Dr. Robert, who had arrived for breakfast during the conversation, had listened to the entire revelation in silence. When they noticed his presence, he was smiling and shaking his head in admiration. "Do you know what this means?" he said. "It means that sometimes the universe puts the right people in the right places for the right reasons, even when they think they're there for other reasons." Martha, who had arrived with Dr. Robert, approached Isabella and held her face between her wrinkled hands. "Dear girl, you came into this world to be an instrument of kindness, first saving lives, then saving dreams. You really are an angel disguised as a child." Consuelo finally managed to speak, her voice choked with emotion. "Isabella, I always knew you were special, but now I understand that you're not just special to us. You're special to the world." Jonathan knelt again in front of Isabella, holding her small hands between his. "Isabella, you changed my life in ways I didn't even know were possible. You taught me that success isn't about how much money you make, but about how many lives you touch in a positive way." He paused, looking around at this entire family that had formed in such an unlikely and beautiful way. "And I want to make a promise to you today. I want to promise that I'll dedicate the rest of my life to building not just buildings, but opportunities, not just developments, but hope. And I want you to be my partner in this mission." "What do you mean, partner?" Isabella asked, curious. "I want to create a foundation, the Isabella Martinez Foundation, an organization that will identify brave children like you who care about their communities and will give them the resources to transform their dreams into reality." Isabella's eyes filled with tears. "A foundation with my name. With your name, with your story, and with your mission to make the world a better place, one person at a time." It was then that Daniel, who had observed the entire conversation in silence, made an observation that perfectly summarized everything that had happened. "Izzy, you wanted to save a school and ended up saving an entire family. Our family and his family too. And that's how a girl who climbed 64 floors to save a school ended up saving much more than she imagined. She saved 2 children from a terrible accident, saved a community school from demolition, saved a family from poverty and separation, and saved a rich man from the empty life he was living. But perhaps most important of all, she proved that true courage has no age, no social class, no limit. True courage is simply the decision to do what is right, even when it's difficult, even when it's dangerous, even when no one is watching. Years later, when Isabella became a young lawyer specializing in children's rights, when Daniel became a recognized artist whose works portrayed the beauty of popular communities, when Michael and Matthew became social entrepreneurs who followed their father's example, they all remembered that breakfast as the moment when they truly understood the transformative power of kindness. The Isabella Martinez Foundation grew and became one of the most respected non-governmental organizations in America, responsible for identifying and supporting hundreds of young community leaders. Jonathan continued building buildings, but now each project included community spaces, schools, health clinics, always thinking about how his constructions could serve the people who already lived in the places where he worked. Consuelo went back to school and graduated in nursing, becoming one of the most beloved professionals at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. She always said that she had learned from her daughter that it's never too late to start over, never too late to dream. And on the terrace of the Golden View, now renamed the Isabella Martinez Terrace, a bronze plaque tells the story of that December afternoon when an 11-year-old girl proved that true heroes don't wear capes, don't have superpowers, and don't appear in Hollywood movies. True heroes are ordinary people who make extraordinary choices when the world needs them. The plaque ends with a phrase that Isabella wrote when she graduated from college. "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision that there is something more important than fear." And every time Michael and Matthew, now adult men with children of their own, take their children to visit that terrace, they tell the story of the brave girl who saved their lives and changed the course of their families forever. Because some stories are too big to be forgotten, some people are too special to be merely remembered, and some moments of courage echo through generations, inspiring other people to also choose kindness when the world seems to be falling apart. The story of Isabella Silva Martinez, the girl who climbed to the sky to save angels, continues to inspire people to this day, because she proved that anyone, regardless of age or circumstances, can choose to be the difference that the world needs to see. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Isabella, Jonathan, Michael, Matthew, and this entire Hart family has touched you as much as it touched us in telling it. This narrative reminds us that true wealth isn't in material possessions, but in the courage to act when others merely observe, in the love we build beyond social barriers, and in the ability to transform a moment of crisis into an opportunity for change for an entire lifetime. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally inspiring stories about people who changed lives through small gestures of great courage. Find our special selection by clicking to the left of your screen. If this story of hope and transformation moved you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave your like on the video. Every day we bring unique narratives that explore the beauty of the human condition and the transformative power of genuine kindness. In the comments, tell us, what moment in this story touched you the most? Have you experienced or witnessed situations where one person's courage changed everything? We await you in the comments, because each story you share enriches our community and inspires new narratives.